This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Design and Architecture Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borodero-Renee. The two of us are architects, partners at the office, and of course, hosts of the show. And today, our guest is Bryan Zabonick.
Bryan is Vice President of Delivery at BQE. BQE is an all-in-one accounting and invoicing software for architecture and engineering offices.
With Bryan, we talk about what it means to have an architecture office that is financially successful and healthy. That's basically the gist of it. You'll hear at the beginning his background, so we got to ask him questions about his experience working for architecture offices and what he's doing now, and things like lines of credit, having a reserve, invoices, billing structures, keeping track of time, how offices bill when they don't keep track of time. And it was, I would say the 90 minutes flew by very, very quickly. We covered a lot of stuff, and I think it's going to be hopefully helpful and interesting to our listeners. And if you have any additional questions, then feel free to reach out to us, and then we will forward you to Bryan. Sponsors.
Would you like to get Asbirds faster?
Yes.
Okay. IPX has you covered. IPX lets you seamlessly transform laser scans into LOD 300 BIM and CAD files. Whether you've got your 3D scans already or need the full laser scanning service, IPX offers instant pricing and order tracking for scan-to-BIM services on any project, no matter the size or complexity. Once a building scan is complete, IPX delivers detailed BIM, CAD, 360 virtual tours, and material takeoffs in their platform, where you can view, share, export, query, and quantify areas, floors, and materials. Check out the IPX link in our show notes. Managing design projects and specifications can be challenging, but Programma makes it effortless. Trusted by top interior design firms in over 75 countries, it's the world's most elegant software for interior designers. With its suite of powerful tools, you will experience smoother client interactions with less back and forth, saving you hours of admin work and making your job more enjoyable. Stop struggling and start thriving with the seriously powerful Programma. Click the link in our show notes and get 25% off an annual subscription with code SECONDSTUDIO at checkout. You will wonder how you ever worked without it.
This is the Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Bryan. Here we go.
Yeah, so I've been working in the architecture and engineering space for the last 15 years, partnering with firms, whether it be as a consultant, externally. I've also worked on the customer side internally. So I've been a consultant taking customers through new software, ERP, a new accounting project management tools, helping them optimize that, helping them find opportunities to leverage the tool to find room for more profitability, to scale their business, et cetera. And then when I was on the customer side, internally worked for a multidiscipline engineering firm. We were in several states, had 300 people, and I was their director of operations. And so my role there was to take our internal applications and really optimize them, leverage them, get our project management team to be looking at reports, knowing what they should be looking at, where to spend their time, and then working with the department managers, helping them build those weekly cadences to talk with their team members and say, hey, these projects are, we've got some scope creep going on. What's going on? Did you get a change order in place, et cetera? So did that for several years and then came back into consulting and really in the leadership role of helping my team members do what I've done in the past, which is be a consultant, provide best practice guidance, take customers from just purchasing our product, which is core. And so taking core, which is an accounting and project management solution, and implementing that internally with their business, putting in SOPs to improve their visibility into project performance, et cetera.
Gotcha. And it's a funny thing because I think generally speaking, architects, at least the ones that we know, tend to be more on the creative side of the brain. We like design, we like all these kinds of things. And there's an engineering aspect, of course. But what I'm getting at is that the financial aspects of running a business as an architecture office and keeping track of the things you just mentioned, those kinds of metrics, is not is definitely not the reason why most architects become architects.
Yep.
And therefore, probably one of the reasons why it's an under, thought about and looked at aspect of running an architecture office, which is also why I think the industry and the profession has a reputation, in my view, of being not very smart financially.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you call out. Architects didn't go to school to learn how to run a business or be in the books all day, right? They want to be in the design, working with clients, growing the relationship piece. And I find architects are really good at that. They're really good at the relationship. And a lot of firms I work with, most of their business is coming from repeat or referrals, which says that they're really good at the relationship piece. And then when you start talking to them about project overruns and looking at a balance sheet or looking at their P&L and trend analysis, you lose them. You lose the audience, right? And it's because it's so foreign to them. It's just not, in my experience, it's not how their brains think. So when I'm working with them, when my team is working with architecture firms specifically, what we're trying to do is show them the least amount of time that they can spend in the software and get the most amount of bang for their buck. And so our goal is not to actually have them in the business management a lot of the time. We want them to spend 20 minutes a week. Then they get their big picture overview. They get the graphs, they get the charts, they get the colors that they like and that tell them what they need to know and where they need to pay attention, what projects are potentially out of control or need some scope change or need some heavier hand review.
Mm-hmm. So I guess one way to think about it too is if we're a hypothetical, small office and we've been practicing in that way. We haven't been keeping good track of all of these metrics and stuff. And then we get hold of you and we're like, Bryan, I think we could be doing better. What do you suggest? What's typically the first things you would have an office, interrogate, or what would you do with them as the first steps?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is determining, are they tracking time? And I know that seems kind of silly or fundamental, right? But the universal problem is time tracking and getting time onto the project. And the reason why I start there, I can't tell you anything else about your project performance if I don't know where your time is going. And so there are a fair amount of firms that we work with that either don't want to enter time at all, or it takes them a month, 2 months, and then they go back and update, a month's worth of timesheet. And at that point, it's a retroactive look. If you went over budget, it's too late to course correct when the project is over. So, like I said, the first thing I'm going to do is say, what's your time tracking? Do you track time? Are you good about having it in at least on a weekly basis? And then what is the expectation? I've had some firms where when they hit budget, they stop entering time. And I think that's one of the worst things you can do to get visibility into your project, into your business, because if we're stopping when we hit our budget, we have no idea how much we overspent. And that prevents us from, in the future, saying, hey, last time we proposed 10,000, but we actually spent 12,000 of equivalent effort. Maybe we should propose more on the next go round and see if we can capture more revenue. So I would start with time entry, which is the first place. Once we've captured, is time entry being accurately represented on the projects? The next thing I do is I look at their fees or their rates. And I start there because understanding the rate schedule and the fees that we're charging individual employees or groups of employees, whether it be designers or architects or senior architects, understanding what we're billing them for helps us understand, are we making money? Are we profitable? And one thing that I think a lot of firms don't account for is overhead. They either don't understand it, don't know it, or don't know why it's important. And if you don't know your overhead rate, so if you don't know what we need to cover outside of what we're paying people, then you don't know if you can be profitable or not with that $90 bill rate. Because I've had experience where I've worked with customers, we've done a rate study analysis, we've done a review of their projects, and they say, oh, this project is our number one project. We're billing $1 million. It's an amazing project. And we start drilling down and we say, well, do you realize that every time a drafter puts time to this project, you're losing $10 an hour? And they're like, there's no way. What do you mean? How are we losing? We're billing them at 90. We're paying, we pay them 35. How are we losing $10? Well,
right.
Your overhead costs are another 70 on top of that 35. And so if you're only billing them at 90, you're effectively losing money every hour they put to the project. So again, sorry, that's we're maybe getting into the weeds a little bit there, but
no, it's great.
But I think the overhead, that's an area that I have found that especially architects, they like to look at the top line number. So they like to say that project is a $50,000 project or that project is a $500,000 project. That's great. But if the $500,000 project is actually losing $5,000 and the $50,000 project is earning us $10,000, I would take the $50,000 project all day long over the $500,000. But I think some people get tied up on that big number at the top and forget to look at, well, what is actually dropping down to the bottom? What am I actually taking away as profit? So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, I can understand it from the architect's perspective, not to defend this kind of behavior.
Yep.
But like sometimes when you see a big fee, it's like, well, we've got to be good with that. Like, there's no way we're not doing awesome with that amount of fee that at the end of it, and it's just enticing for in that way. I was wondering, for the offices who don't track time on the extreme end at all, I've always wondered, like, how do you know what to bill then? I don't know. It seems like a really stupid and obvious question, but like, yeah. I genuinely, what is it based on?
And how do you collect data over time to be helpful to, charge better for the next project?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly why I think that time entry is so important. But for the firms, and I've certainly worked with them in my career where they are adamant time entry is not important for the business. And that is a unnecessary noise to ask employees to do that. And so when I drill down and try to show them all the angles, we'll say, usually the argument is to the tune of, well, we bill our projects fee-based. So it does not matter if I put in 100 hours or 10 hours, I'm getting my $50,000 fee. That's what I'm going to be getting. And so who cares how much time is on it? And then how do they determine when are they going to bill? Oftentimes it's based on, well, we completed the design, so I can bill $20,000, or we completed the drawings, or we've hit a certain phase in the construction process, we can bill the rest of the project. And so, but to then go back to the question of like, how do I analyze the project? You really can't. I mean, you're very limited. You've effectively limited yourself to just looking at what you've billed against your contract. That is the only metric you have. I have a contract of 100,000, I've billed 80, so I have 20 left. But I have no idea how much effort I've put into the project, how much cost I've put into the project. There's no further analytics beyond contract and build.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess it's kind of like if you think about it at the very, very, I guess you call it high level, and you are still tracking somehow your overhead, and you say annually, I need to make this much to break even, and as long as you're billing enough, but it's a very kind of I guess would be macro would be the word, like a macro way of looking at it. And I feel like and also this brings a very specific question of, is fixed fee better than hourly in terms of how you bill? There's a percentage of construction costs, but that's become less common these days. So actually, do you have any thoughts across those three structures?
Yeah, I do. I just want to go back real quick to one thing you just said actually made me realize, so when we're not entering time, it is really the only way we can manage the business is by looking at our balance sheet or our bank account. And that is actually what I find is a lot of firms operating this way are managing to the bank balance. So they log in and say, I've got $200,000 in the bank, I'm good to go. Not realizing that $200,000 is allocated to payroll and if they're working with some sub-consultants, and really, if they take that all into account, they're negative $10,000. But they're looking and saying, I have $200 in the bank, I'm good. And I think too, outside of that is some of the times the arguments I've heard is, well, I must be billing the right amount because I have money at the end of the year. And so I'm making profit.
Right.
And
so get out of here with your hours tracking. I don't want to get into that.
And of course, my counter argument is always, well, you could be making more. You don't know you don't know what you're leaving on the table when you're not entering time. So, so to address the question on fixed fee, hourly, there's a lot of thoughts on this. I've seen it in blog posts, I've seen it in LinkedIn, I've heard it from my customers. And if you were to ask my advice or my opinion, what I think is the best billing structure, I actually call it value-based billing. It is effectively fixed fee, but it is value-based. And I call it that because we are selling our value. And I've used the analogy with some of my clients and customers who are evaluating changing the way they bill. I've used the analogy of, you might have seen it. It's a picture of a engineer. There's a massive boat in the background behind him, and he's holding a wrench, and it says, something to the tune of the bill for this engineer to fix the ship was, $100,000. And it's like, well, why? Well, I could have paid him $100 an hour, but the extra $99,000 or so is where he knows what bolt to tighten to fix the ship, right? And that is the value. His perceived value to us is $100,000 because he knows what is wrong with the ship. And so that's how I like to pitch it to my customers too, is right. You're selling your value, and you can limit yourself to your time, which is the hourly model. And there's going to be an upper limit to that. There is, at some point you cannot bill anymore. You can only work so many hours, even if you work 24/7, there is an upper limit to what you can bill. There's also an upper limit to what a customer is going to pay per hour. Right? If you put it on that invoice and you say, I'm billing you $1,000 an hour, that's going to stand out. I'm like, I'm paying you $1,000 an hour. Whereas if you come to them and say, hey, that design, based on everything you asked us to do and our expertise and, pulling from our previous experience, pulling from our knowledge, knowing what you are looking for in your design, we believe that value to you is $8,000. Now, if that only takes us 8 hours, we're still billing $1,000 an hour, but we haven't explicitly said that to the customer. We have said, we believe everything you've asked us to do is worth $8,000. And that's the value-based approach, right? On paper, it's fixed fee. That's what it is. You've come up with a fixed fee or a lump sum based on your understanding of the scope, based on your understanding of the expertise. But I think where firms make the mistake with fixed fee projects is they come up with a budget and they say, okay, I think I need my drafter for 10 hours, and I need my project manager for 15, and I need my architect for 20. Okay, those all come together. That equals 10,000. We're going to bill 10,000. Well, what if you could bill 12,000 because you're not telling the customer how many hours you're putting into it. You're
Right.
determining that the work you're asking us to do is worth 12, it's not worth 10. So that was maybe a long-winded answer to get
No,
to
I love it.
the preferred billing I like, which is value-based. My least favorite billing type, of course, is hourly, for all the reasons I've already listed, which is you have literally limited yourself on how much you can bill, and you have said, I am putting a dollar value to my time, and I think that is a limiting factor.
Yeah, and I could see also from a client of architect point of view where, that's where they could start nitpicking on hours or not calling the architect because they know they're gonna, the clock starts ticking and all of that. In the same time, I feel like doing fixed fee could be difficult to estimate, especially in a creative field where even if you have data of previous project, each project is different. So it's almost like you do need to estimate with a contingency of extra time just to make sure that you're not underestimating.
Yeah, totally.
But you also don't want to overestimate because then it becomes unfair to the client. So
it's a tricky thing. I mean, we've had this discussion maybe on here or definitely outside of the podcast with a lot of colleagues, as you can imagine. Everyone's always like, what do you do? How do you do it? Did you figure out a magic solution?
And there is trends too, depending on localities. Like for example, Northern California and Southern California,
completely different.
Use two different models, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, just a quick thought on that, is if you're going to do a fixed fee or a value-based, however you want to call it, the most important thing, and this is where I sometimes lose, the architects, is your contract needs to be tight. Like your scope of work needs to spell out exactly what you're doing. And so that way you don't run into oh, shoot, the customer just called and completely changed the design on us after we're 40 hours into the project. You have that, hey, like, we're happy to do that. We want to partner with you. We got to get some more scope because we've already invested all of this time under the original premise. So that's the piece, of course, if you are doing fixed fee, you do have to have a contract locked in because the risk is if you don't, customer says, hey, you told me 10,000. There's nowhere in here that says I can't change scope midway.
Yeah.
It's interesting, speaking transparently, over the years, we've done every version of the billing, types and mixed them up and, whatever else. And one of the things we came across with a fixed fee proposal on only a few instances. So this is not, to say this applies to all clients or every office, is that those contracts, like you said, they had to be ironclad and much more detailed than if it's an hourly arrangement. Hourly arrangement's easy. And you don't even have to list additional services because what difference does it make, in a certain way. So we had a fixed fee contract that covered all the bases, and this particular client I was thinking of was not very experienced in these industries at all. So when he saw it, he freaked out. He's like, why are you saying all this stuff is not included in the services? I'm like, well, they're not by any normal metric to begin with, and they're spelled out in the contract because we're doing a fixed fee. Perhaps if this were hourly, then I wouldn't have to list all these things. So that was a funny example I came across at one point in time, and it made me think about, again, that perception that the clients have depending on, who they are and how we're conveying stuff. But at the same time, I agree with what you said. And we had years ago a well-known architect on the show, and one of his remarks always stuck with me. He's like, it's absolutely insane that we value ourselves by dollars per hour.
Yep.
And his thinking was like, some hours that I spend are worth nothing, and some half hours I spend are worth like $500,000 or $1 million.
And I think it goes back to the what you call the value base, right? The experience that an architect acquires over time by doing more and more and more work, right? Like
you actually get penalized for being efficient.
Hourly rates go up because inflation, and every year everybody just kind of like raise them arbitrarily, but it's a kind of a standard measure that everybody uses, which has nothing to do with how much experience you have or talent or knowledge. which also I think makes an argument for not doing hourly.
Yeah, just a couple follow-up thoughts there. One, I think you just said something that I think, David, you had said, you get penalized for being efficient or better as you learn. And it's 100% true. And that's kind of one of the counter arguments I use when explaining why I don't think hourly is the best business model, because you're going to get to a point where you say, okay, I budgeted 8 hours, I got it done in 5. Do I put 8 hours on my timesheet so I can bill the 8 that I told the customer that I was going to bill 8? Or do I take 3 hours less of what I thought I was going to bill? And so the other thought I just wanted to quickly add, we were talking about contracts and having them ironclad and having them spelled out exactly what's in scope. And I think, yeah, that's certainly the feedback I get from some architects saying, I don't want to have my contract be T crossing, I dotting. That's not how I want to do business. And I hear that. I hear that argument. I will just say, I think it's better to work through all of that and get on the same page as the client at the start of the project than be midway through and they're calling you saying, why are you billing me for this? Why are you billing me for this? Or, hey, you told me it's going to be 10,000. You've just billed me. We're now at 11. How much more do you have left, right? So instead of having those conversations, those tough conversations in the middle of the project, and then having to ask for more money, you've solved for that at the start of the project and said, look, like we know we can do the job for this amount, and we know that our worth is this amount. Like, you're coming to us because we are the experts. And so we believe, based on everything you've asked us to do, this is how much it's going to cost. But at the same time, if you change scope, or we get in there and realize that we need to add something else, we do need the flexibility to be able to charge more. So, like I said, I just wanted to flag that real quick. Like, I think it's better to have those conversations up front. You and client are on the same page from a financial standpoint, and now you can focus on the design and you can focus on the fun part of the project, right? In my personal life, I've done some projects with contractors, home remodels or landscaping projects, and the ones that stress me the most are the ones where I have no idea what they are going to be invoicing me, and I end up making sacrifices during the course of the project because I say, oh, that's going to be I can't call them because that's going to be another $300 call. Whereas when it's fixed fee, they probably got more or the same as they would have if it was billed hourly. But my experience as the customer is smoother, right? I don't have to worry about, can I call them or not, or what happens if there's a delay, whatever it may be. I don't have to worry about that. I can focus on just the fun part of the project and interacting with them as a business. So
it's really fascinating, the psychology behind one model versus the other. And there are definitely some clients who prefer one or the other. Like, we had a potential client a few years ago, and they explicitly stated they want an hourly arrangement. And I remember thinking, you might be first of all, there are not many clients who specify up front what they prefer. Like, no one does that. Yeah. But secondly, I've never had anyone tell us that. Usually it's the opposite, right? I want it fixed and I want it low. But your point about contracts, I wanted to also speak on, and because I agree with it completely. And actually, what we've been doing the last number of years now, and I also almost encourage all offices to do it from the very, very beginning, from when they start their office, is we have a meeting with the client, and I go through the contract with them basically line by line. And our contract's long.
Sounds like a really fun meeting.
It's a really fun meeting, I know. But
it's important.
But I do it for the reasons you just said. And also I end up using it as a way to talk through the process, so they understand because it's a confusing, long process for anyone who's not been through it. All these different phases, different people come in at different times and different roles. And so I wouldn't say it's a fun meeting, but if it does become more productive than just covering kind of what they need to know, in that it allows us to explain process to them. They're like, okay, now I understand what's going to happen, and I'm learning something. That's not just ultra dry legal language for an hour and a half or whatever.
Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, we kind of joked around it being not a fun meeting, but to my point, like, you got that out of the way, right? You're not doing that in the course of the project. But the other thing too, and this actually applies to my team. So my team of consultants taking customers through a software implementation, it relates well to also what architects go through in the phases of their projects. And I tell my team all the time, we have to give our customer the roadmap. I use the analogy that the customer is the driver, we are the passenger, but we have the map. They have no idea where we are going. They are relying solely on our expertise. They're relying on us to navigate them through this process. And it's the same thing with architects, right? A lot of clients don't know the different phases of a project, or what to expect at each phase, or that this phase actually can sometimes have delays. We're telling you now that there can be a stall in the project at this point. Setting that expectation. I do use the analogy, and I think it again is applicable here, but I use this with my team of, we've all been that driver in the car, and we're driving along, and our passenger is guiding us, and we've all been that person, and then the passenger says all of a sudden, oh, by the way, you're supposed to turn, and you're 3 lanes over from where you're supposed to turn. And you get that anxiety feeling. You're like, oh my gosh, why didn't you tell me that 2 miles ago? I could have merged over, everything I could have done. Versus the experience of passenger saying, hey, by the way, up in 2 miles, you're going to be taking the exit. So, work on getting over to the exit.
Or passenger falling asleep completely.
Different. Yes. That is the worst case, right?
It's a great analogy, actually.
I've never thought of it exactly that way, but that is very well said. It also, just for Marina's humor, maybe also think that, like, there is a level of stress involved, when you're driving, and obviously this applies to the professional practices, but when you're driving, and let's say you do make that left turn, and now you're headed straight, the first thing that happens for the driver, you always ask, what's next?
Yep.
And then the worst thing is you have a passenger who a lot of times doesn't have a lot of driving experience. They're like, why do you need to know? It's not for another, whatever. I'm like, just because.
Yep.
I'd like to know for my own, mental health and state. And it's probably exactly the same thing for clients, actually.
Yeah, I think pulling it back to the client that an architect firm is going to deal with is giving them that roadmap of, okay, like in 1 to 2 weeks into the project, this is what to expect. 2 to 4 weeks into the project, this is what to expect. Some clients may not care about that, but I would say that most of them would like to know, when is it coming, what's coming. If you are doing installment invoices, kind of again from a personal standpoint, I had a larger landscaping project done a couple of years back. I worked with a landscape architect, and they told me, at this point in the project, we will send you your 25% invoice. So be expecting your 25% invoice when this happens. When this happens, your 50% invoice comes in. When this happens, your 75% comes in, and then of course at the end of the project. And that was very helpful for me, again, as the customer, to know, when am I writing the check? Because that's a big deal. When is the money leaving my account? So.
And actually, that's a good segue to, do you see any best practices to invoices that would lead to faster payment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. There's another question, maybe sub-question of, do we do a retainer or a prepayment or not?
That's on my list too.
Yeah, and I think, so I'll start there maybe. I think retainers have their place. I think the challenge in architecture firms that you're going to have is, we're producing a service, but it's also somewhat of a product, and it's hard to, with clients, they want to see something. They want to see a result before they turn over some money. but also there's risk for the architecture firm. So my rule of thumb is if you've never done work with the client, you don't know them, they're not a referral source, it's maybe a project that has some other risk, it's maybe a new development you're designing, there's potential that the client might not be around. Then in that case, to protect your business interests, you need to do a retainer or a prepayment, at least for the design. And then once you get past the design, you evaluate from there. As far as invoicing and like improving collections, of course, I get this question asked a lot. I think the most important thing you can do is determining, one, how does the customer want to receive the invoice? I mean, more and more customers want email at this point. And I think that's the way to go, right? You don't have to rely on the post office to get the invoice to the right person. You also don't have to worry about that invoice getting to an office and then sitting on a desk somewhere or sitting on the wrong person's desk, and you lose some time there. So I think email's the way to go. I think offering multiple payment options also helps, right? So allowing a customer to pay from their phone, so everyone has their phone on them at all times. So offering a way that I can get that email and I can just pay it all from there. I don't have to go to a desk and write a check, or I don't have to even go to my bank account. Potentially having something core BQE we offer in our software, we call it e-payments, but it's a link right on the invoice that our clients can send to their client, and it's a payment link. So they click that, takes them to a payment portal, that you put in your banking or credit card information and process the payment right then and there. Outside of that, right, if a customer is not wanting to pay, there's really I don't have any special sauce or magic
trick.
There's
no threats that BQE can send over to them.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like if a customer's not paying, there's only so much you can do, right?
Yeah.
But I think for the customers who are going to pay, right, the ones that are clients that are going to pay, giving them those multiple payment options, making it easy, less resistance for them to do so. I've seen some customers, they're starting to offer payment by PayPal, right? And so, if you're working with an individual, for example, a lot of individuals have PayPal accounts, and it makes it very easy. You don't even have to think about your bank account. You just authorize it with your Face ID. So, just exploring some other choices to give your client options. And then also just real quick, like I would say, understanding your client profile and meeting them where they're at. If you're working with individuals, they're probably going to want to pay through credit card or ACH. If you're working with big businesses, they're probably going to be a little bit more old school and want to do a check or a bank EFT, whatever it may be. So,
yeah.
Do you see any specific trends as to how often architecture offices invoice? Like, do you see a lot of them that do like once a month, or is it like twice a month, or every week, or every day,
based on deliverables,
or based on deliverables?
Yep. Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think the industry as a whole is just used to doing monthly billing. That's everyone does billing. A lot of payment cycles are based on monthly billing. A lot of payment schedules are based on that. And so I haven't seen any trends one way or the other. I think it's either going to be weekly or monthly. The one thing that's interesting, it's actually a tactic we employed at the customer that I worked for. So when I was on the client side, a tactic we employed was when we do the final report, we delivered the final invoice. So when we sent the final report, attached to that was the final invoice. And then we had our project manager call and say, do you have questions on our final report? Do you have questions on the invoice? And that eliminated some of the invoice sits with the client for 15 days, and then they tell us, oh, what's this line item on here? And then we have this back and forth. We get that out of the way right at the front. Of course, you have to have, in order to do the invoicing that frequently and attach it with the report, you've got to have your process pretty streamlined in order to do that. And I think that's why a lot of clients are still doing monthly billing because they don't want to do billing review more than once a month. It still is a big, cumbersome task for a lot of customers to go through and do your time review, your expense review. And the thought of having project managers do that more than once a month, they're like, no, thank you. We can barely get them to do it once a month. We're not going to ask them to do it every time we're delivering something on a project.
And now, a little break for our show sponsors.
Revit users, you have access to a powerful new capability you might not know about. Available with Revit version 2023.1 onward, Autodesk Insight is a next-generation carbon analysis tool that can help you make the leap toward low-carbon design. With only a few clicks, Insight lets you analyze, understand, and track the embodied and operational carbon impact of your design choices. You can then visualize opportunities for energy efficiency and carbon mitigation with its flexible dashboards, helping you make more sustainable and informed decisions. Check out the Insight link in our show notes to learn more. This episode of The Second Studio is brought to you by BQE Core, the all-in-one firm management software built for architects. Designed by architects for architects, Core helps you track time effortlessly, manage projects seamlessly, and get paid faster, so you can focus on design, not spreadsheets. With powerful automation and real-time insights, it's everything you need to run a smarter and more profitable firm. See how BQE Core can transform your practice by clicking the link in our show notes. What is there a particular size of office, or at what point should an office entertain the idea of having not just an accountant, but like a business advisor, basically someone like yourself to a degree, to step in and help facilitate a lot of these things and track these things and et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer the question, I'll break it down into two parts. One is, at what point do we need an external, we'll call them a fractional advisor, whether that be a controller, fractional CFO, whatever you want to say. At what point is there benefit in having that? And then at what point is there benefit in just employing someone full-time and having them be a full-time in-house resource? I would say 5 or less people in your firm, it's probably just not worth your investment, to be honest. Maybe do a quarterly or annual review. When you get into the 10, we'll say 5 to 20 space, having somebody, whether it be a fractional or an internal person, that's where you really need to have that. Because if you don't, you're going to end up having the partners or the principals of the firm doing it, and we don't really want them spending their time doing that. We want them spending their time developing the business, meeting clients, doing design work. We don't want them getting bogged down in entering vendor invoices and then making sure they coded it correctly and then analyzing the financials at the end of the month. Like, we want them to see a completed financial package, and here are the things they need to look at. When we get 20 plus, that is where I start to say, why don't you have someone fully employed in that controller position? Because you're spending, at that point, you're probably spending the same amount, if not more, on a fractional CFO as you would if you just had that person employed full time. And then they know your business in and out. They're there, for daily questions. You don't have to worry about how often can I call them without getting another bill. And so, I will say I've worked with a customer in the past. They had 80 people, and they were using a fractional CFO, and it was not successful. And we, working with them, they asked for my advice, and I said, I looked at the spend, and then you're spending $200,000 a year on this fractional CFO. You could just take 1-to-1, spend $200,000 on an internal person and get more value. And so, I think that's probably, to be honest, an area, going back to some of the overhead conversations and analyzing the business. I have certainly heard, especially with my background being on the business side or the back office, if you want to call it that, not a lot of value being put into that position, right? I will say, when I was on the client side, there was a particular board member who liked to walk by my office and tell me that I was a cost center, that I didn't bring anything to the table. All I did was drag down the profit effectively. And so I think there's still some thinking in the industry that controller or that CFO or that office manager, there's not a lot of value in having that person, other than, they key some data in and they produce our financials once a month.
Yeah, I can see that. I do think that, and maybe this is me just being optimistic, but I feel like for sure the architecture profession is changing and shifting in many ways, for the better. And one of the ways is, I think that younger practices, younger meaning like 50 years old and younger, for architect standards, are becoming much more aware of the importance and the value of the things that we're talking about. And I think that's for a lot of reasons. I think it's one, because the millennial generation, there's no sense of security at all for us in the future. So we cannot afford to make remarks like that person did and be like, not important.
Yep.
Like, we all are very aware of how important these things are. It's just a question of, like you said, at what points make sense for an office to engage with these people in varying degrees.
Yeah, and I do agree with that too, right? So what I'm seeing as the, we'll say, firm leadership is changing generations, we are seeing more, customers open-minded to, there is value in having a controller, or yes, there is value in having people enter their time, and there is value in having a project management solution that tells us where we could potentially earn some more profit. And so, where I'll say too, even on my side of, we charge our customers, right? We're a consulting practice, and our customers pay for our time to learn our software. And I've been doing this now roughly 15 years. Even in that short span, I have had to justify my value and my team's value to a firm less and less as the years have gone on, because they understand the power of investing in an expert who knows the software and can set them up for success.
That makes sense.
I want to talk about cash flow versus profit.
Yep.
And because I think that a lot of architects who are like complete novices in this kind of language, in this territory, I feel like the two get mixed up, either consciously or like subconsciously. We think, a lot of architects tend to think, there's cash flow, then therefore there's profit. Maybe actually not dissimilar to the earlier point of, we just look at the top line, look at the big number, and then not worry about anything else. But yeah, I just want to hear your thoughts about the difference between the two. And is there a standard metric of profitability that an office of X size should be aiming for or aware of? Yeah.
Great topic for sure, especially given my background on the with my degree in educational accounting, and kind of, I enjoy talking to customers about why they should care about, we'll say, accrual versus cash, or profit versus cash flow. Of course, cash flow is important. If we do not have cash coming into the bank, we can't pay our people, we can't pay our vendors. So we absolutely have to know what our cash flow is going to be. However, if we're just looking at cash flow, we are missing the bigger picture. And a good example of that is, let's say we have this big project, we just hit a big milestone. So we are able to build, we'll say, 200,000 for this example, and customer pays us. They pay us very quickly. We just got $200,000. It's July. We have 200 in the bank. However, if I'm just looking at the inbound and not anticipating what the outbound is going to be, there's a potential you're going to take that 200,000 and go spend it here. You buy a new conference room table, you expand the building, you do all these projects, you update your branding on your website, and then all of a sudden things come due. And unless you have another project that has that same flow of inbound cash, you're going to be in the hole. And so, to me, you have to look at both. You have to look at cash flow to know, can we pay our bills next week or next month? What can we anticipate to come in? You do have to anticipate that, especially if you don't have a reserve in place. And I will say, as businesses are growing, having a reserve is a luxury. So it's not, I don't anticipate working with a client and they've got a bunch of cash that they're sitting on. But knowing if I'm negative or positive from a profit standpoint tells me, is that cash flow going to be negative or positive in the future? You didn't specifically ask, but I just want to spend a little bit on the concept of cash versus accrual reporting. So when you're looking at your financial statements, specifically your profit and loss, a lot of customers just look at cash and they say, okay, I collected $50,000, I paid $30,000, I made $20,000. But accrual removes. Why accrual, I think, is a better way to manage the business, is it removes the cyclical or the I just did a big billing month, I'm going to get a big amount in the bank account next month, or I just paid a big bill, so I look like I lost a bunch of money this month, but really I was prepaying for the full year. Accrual removes all of that. So accrual doesn't care when you collect it or when you pay it. Accrual cares what actually happened and when did it happen. And so, for example, I like to talk in extremes to help explain the point. So let's say we have a very large value-based or fixed fee project. It's $1 million. We can't bill any of it until we've reached milestone 1. So let's say milestone 1 takes us 4 months to get there. So for 4 months, we have people putting time to the project, we are producing work, but we can't bill for any of it. We are paying those individuals to do the work along the way. If we are not looking at accrual and accruing for some of that revenue to match the cost, those 4 months are going to effectively look like we're doing worse than we really are. And then when we are able to bill and collect that $1 million, that month is going to look fantastic because we don't have all of the other cost to offset the 1 million. And so, again, working on the client side, I definitely had department heads that thought, oh, well, I'll hold all of my billing until the end of the year and make my next month look really good. And it's short-sighted, right? And so not sure if I'm 100% answering the question there, but that's kind of what came to mind. And then I think you asked too, what is the target profit that we see? So I think the goal for a lot of firms who are kind of at that, we'll say, gold standard is 20%. That's what I usually see. In reality, it's going to be 12 to 15. If you're in the 10 or below profit margin, that's when you need to start saying, is this project worth our effort? Not that 10% profit is bad. It's just there's opportunity to make a 15 or a 20 on other projects, or maybe optimizing other areas. And so that's when you're in the 10 or below profit percent, that's when you should really be evaluating, are there areas we can optimize, or maybe we need to stop doing this type of project because we're not able to get 15%.
I think going back on what you just talked about the look on the accrual profit also makes a lot of sense, because if you look at 1 year for an architecture business, 1 month you might have a bunch of projects, or maybe projects are entering different phase of design and construction, and therefore the billing kind of like reflects that or not. Therefore you can't just focus on the cash flow because it is not an accurate picture of that whole year, for example.
Yeah, I think you guys are based in California, if I'm not mistaken. So you have beautiful weather year round, which means work in this industry can happen year round. I'm based in Indiana. We have 6 months of the year that is rainy, snowy, icy, depending on, I say architecture is construction adjacent, right? A lot of things we do in the architecture industry are reliant on, can we build a home right now? Can we, are buildings being put up? Are roads being, is concrete being poured? In Indiana, you can't pour concrete effectively from October to, February. It's really tough to build homes when it is, there's 6 inches of snow on the ground. Yeah. And so just taking your point a little bit further, when you're looking at an accrual-based system versus cash, it does effectively remove some of that seasonality that a firm in we'll say Indiana or Michigan or wherever it may be would potentially experience.
Kind of like segueing from, the profit percentage that we talked about into an office wanting to scale up. Besides an office getting a bunch of phone calls for projects and, feeling like they're short-staffed in order to, take all the projects in, is there any signs from the accounting point of view that could show that an office is ready to grow now?
Yeah, it's a good question.
A bucket full of cash, would you?
Yeah, I think that's where probably I do see a lot of firms use line of credits because
I was just going to ask about that.
Yeah, because of the cash flow, right? Wanting to be able to make payroll and not have to worry about it. So having a line of credit and being able to draw on that in an emergency if we need to, because that check for that big project comes in a week late. So that's one area I bring that up to say, if you're not having to draw on your line of credit, like your line of credit is sitting at 0 and you're not having to draw on that on a monthly, quarterly basis, that's a clue that your projects, your cash flow, your inbound payments on revenue are sustainable. And this is where you also get into the point of being able to potentially build that reserve that I talked about that firms love to have, but often aren't able to. When you're getting into we do have a reserve. We're not drawing on our line of credit, and slowly but surely we're going from 50,000 sitting in the bank on average to 100,000 to 150. That tells you that we have a little bit more area that we can use for investment, right? We have we can take on a little bit more risk to grow the business because we're sitting on that reserve. I think the other piece, you mentioned what is a clue it's time to grow, or maybe we need to go out and hire more folks, or we need to expand to a new location. It's hard to say just looking at the financials. And I say that because in this industry, our projects are our lifeblood. And so you can't look at financials without comparing projects. And quite honestly, I think if someone is working at an architecture firm or an engineering firm, and they are sitting in that controller, CFO, office manager seat, and they're not looking at projects at the same time, they're doing that firm a disservice, right? If they are just looking at financials, they're not seeing the complete picture. And so I give that background to say, I think where the value add for an in-house person or the fractional CFO is expanding their review from just, hey, your financials are trending up, your net revenue per employee is good, your labor multiplier is, we want a 3.2, you're getting a 3.3. Great, that all looks good. But then expanding that into looking at projects at a macro level and saying, hey, this service line is really booming. You are closing 75% of the proposals you go after on this project. That tells us we've got something here, and we should expand and put investment into that. So that actually kind of takes me into another component, which is which we haven't really talked about, and that is pursuing new work, but it's connected. And what I mean by that is if we're not tracking our win rate, it is hard to know what service lines we should invest in. And what I mean by that is if you're winning 20% of projects that you go after on, we'll say K through 12 design, and we're winning 80% of projects we go after on new high-rise buildings, we should maybe stop pursuing the K through 12 and start and focus on the high-rise, or take a step back and say, what are we doing wrong on the K through 12 design that is not having us win at a higher rate? Do we just not have the connections? Is the reason we're losing because we've overbid? Whatever it is. But I know that doesn't directly maybe answer your question, but as I'm thinking through, like putting myself in the shoes of someone who is more on the operations finance side, those are the areas that I like to explore, because I can look at a balance sheet, I can look at a P&L once a month and give you some metrics based on it. But what is ultimately driving the balance sheet and the P&L and our success is what's happening on the projects. And that's where I think, again, you're doing the firm a disservice if you're not looking at that.
Yeah, that's well said. It's funny talking to you. Those TV shows where, I don't know the names of them, but like someone owns a restaurant and it's not being run properly, so they have an expert come in and they like look at the balance sheets and they're like, you're making this piece of pie, this type of pie, and no one buys it. Why are you selling this pie? No one's buying it.
Yep.
I feel like we're talking to one of those folks, but instead of it being for like a bar or a restaurant, it's for architecture offices. I wanted to go back to the question. Oh no, you mentioned line of credit and having a reserve, and I was wondering, like, how common is it for offices to utilize a line of credit, let's say fairly often, whatever that means? And then are a lot of offices, or what amount of offices are able to build a substantial reserve? Yeah,
I think that's a little bit tricky for me to answer, because of course I'm just working with I see the books of clients who are purchasing our product, and I'm not necessarily analyzing their financials unless they ask us to do so. If I had to just, based on my experience, guess, I would say, from a line of credit standpoint, I would say it is fairly common. It's fairly common because this industry is somewhat we've talked about cash flow a lot. This industry, I do think, is impacted by cash flow and we'll say some macroeconomic things that happen. And so even the best firms who have the best client relationships and have been around for 20 plus years, they have times where the bank account is dry because, their projects, maybe there was a period 6 months ago where they weren't able to close a bunch of projects because, something outside of their control was preventing, their clients from signing up for new things. And so even though in general the firm is healthy, 6 months ago we had a blip, and we're now paying for that now by not having the same amount of billing that we were used to, but we still have the same amount of people. And so we're having to, kind of cover that. And so I think having that line of credit in place gives a little bit of comfort that, hey, I can make payroll next week and not have to call my customer and say, can you please make sure the check is to me on Monday, or I can't pay my people Friday.
Right.
So I think, again, looking at the profiles, I don't know if I don't see line of credits a lot on firms less than 10 people. One, I think it's hard for them to get it, to be honest. And two, when you're at that size, if you can't make payroll, that's when you'll go to your staff and say, hey, payroll's going to be late. And not that that's ideal, but I think that happens in that case. As you get larger, the line of credit becomes more of a safety net that I see, more and more often. As far as the reserve goes, I think the sweet spot, at least what we shot for when I was on the client side, we wanted to have 3 payrolls worth. So effectively a month and a half, because we were biweekly. And the reason we wanted that in our reserve is we felt like that could accommodate for if we had a bad month. If we have a bad billing month, we still have a month of coverage in payroll in our payroll cost before we have to start saying, do we have to draw on our line of credit or do we have to make some tough decisions? Because again, not every firm, but it's not uncommon to have at least one bad month a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of overcomes that risk of having that bad month.
It's fascinating.
To you, I was thinking about like overheads, and if there is anything that you see and I don't know if you get that granular in the details of the reports, but if you see any like big trends in overheads that are just things that could be kind of trimmed out from offices. That's just, I don't know, like architects just drink way too much coffee and this becomes like the huge tab every month. Like, is there something that everyone who's listening to this episode could do to help their financials?
Stop buying those stupid Pentel pens.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. As I mentioned at the start, like I work with architects and engineers, and I think where their spend is very different, right? And so I think where architects run high in overhead is in we'll say the new conference room table, the new artwork in the front lobby, the photography to show off our work, which is great. Like we need to show off our work, but are those areas where we need to every month refresh that? Or is that something we can say, hey, our design and our brand is still represented well by what we have, even though it's maybe 12, 18 months old. I think that's the piece, going back to the branding and the creativity of architects and designers, is they want a client to walk into their office and say, wow, you guys are good. Mm-hmm. This resonates with me. I want to sign with you because of your front lobby. I think what I've seen is the front lobby gets a refresh too often. Like we don't need to refresh the front lobby every time there's a new style of desk or new chair that comes out and hits the market. The other area that so there's that, right? There's we'll say the office furniture and design. The other area, going to our largest expense, which is our people. I mean, in a firm, in an architecture firm, our expense is our people. That's what we're selling, is effectively our labor. And so that's always going to be our number one expense. And so when we start looking at what runs high in overhead in architecture firms, and it can't really be helped, unfortunately, is your highly compensated employees, which are going to be your principals and your partners, are not often billing as much as they are paid. And this is going back to a callback from earlier, where this is where value-based helps, right? Yeah. Value-based helps to cover that highly compensated employee who maybe only puts 5 hours to a project every week. And so if we're billing hourly, we're not getting anything in return. We're not getting enough in return for that 5 hours to cover their full salary. And so when you start from what I've seen, from just a pure analytics standpoint, you look at an architecture firm's P&L, you're often going to see a big number in indirect principal labor or general office principal labor, whatever that's called, or marketing. Because that seems to be, if you've got a principal architect and they're not working on billable projects, the other place that a lot of time goes is marketing. And so finding ways, there's only so much of that can be helped, right? There's only so much of that we can cover. But that, again, callback is that's why I believe value-based billing is helpful, because it allows us to say, yeah, we're paying this principal architect, 150, 200,000. They're highly compensated. In revenue-wise, if they just bill by the hour, maybe we only get exactly the break even on, what we're paying them. But if we're charging fixed fee or value-based, we can 2x, 3x, 4x what we're paying them.
Yeah.
Interesting. One of the things I was thinking about as well, I think that ties into this part of the conversation, is going all the way back to time tracking. There's the subtleties of there's the subtleties of from an employee's perspective. If I spent X hours on this thing, do I actually log those exact hours because I was unproductive for half of those? We've all had days like that. And then, in the upper management level, if the fee isn't based on an hourly structure, do we actually bill 100% of the time that's been logged? And let's assume for a moment that somehow the log time is exactly perfect. That was exactly the amount of time spent by everybody. So therefore, quote, it's fair. But if at the end of the month it produces a number that's huge, a lot of offices then wonder, do I send this bill to the client? And most offices don't, right? They arbitrarily hack away at it.
Yep.
And it's arbitrary, right? There's some made up reasonings of percentages and based on this and that, but really at the end of the day, it's arbitrary. And then you hack away at it, and then you send a lowered bill to the client. So I don't really have a question with that, but I know this is a big part of how offices practice.
Well, it goes back to the perception of the invoice too, right?
True.
Yeah, and I was going to say, effectively what they've done by hacking away is they've reduced their value. As they are evaluating the invoice, they have said, we don't, let's say it comes up with $15,000, and they're looking at that and going, there's no way we can bill our client $15,000. We got the most we can bill is 12. Well, what they have just done is said our value to the client is 12,000. It doesn't matter that we've put 15 in. We don't think we can bill 15. Obviously, we hope we have the other problem. We put 12 in and we think we can bill 15. But I don't know if this was specifically what you were mentioning. I do see this a lot, especially in small to mid-sized firms where the principal or lead architect has to perform activity that we can't really justify billing $150, $175, $200 an hour. But we don't have enough CAD designers to do the CAD work. And so the lead architect ends up doing the work. And so we reduce their per hour rate to be in line with the service that they were actually providing. And again, that goes back to we have to do that if we're billing hourly, because our client isn't going to pay $200 an hour for design for CAD design or drafting. But if we're doing a fixed fee, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's doing the work. We got the work done. I don't know if that's what you were specifically referring to, where they kind of sit there and say, well, David was on this project, but he was doing work that we really can't bill full rate for. That's kind of what I heard when you were talking. So.
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of it, for sure. It's just I've seen it firsthand. It's this weird territory, this weird space that it happens all the time in offices, and I hear more often than I wish from other architects who say to me exactly what I just said, which is, I can't build that.
Well,
I'm like, well, first of all, if you're that over your estimate, then something's wrong internally.
Yep.
And that's one thing, but also, generally speaking, I often find I'm like, well, assuming that you're not so far off the mark with your estimate that you gave the client at the beginning, let's put that aside. You kind of have to give clients the opportunity or the chance to respond. And this is also the same mentality when it comes to even pricing your services on a value basis or a fixed fee, right? So many architects, they undervalue themselves because they're afraid.
Yeah,
they're afraid they're not going to get it, so I'm going to go low.
Yeah.
And then, well, guess what, man? If you go low, everyone wants to negotiate. Then you have to go lower. Yeah. And at some point, what are you doing?
But I think it goes back to the the perception of the architects and their own value, and that also points back to architects' relationship to money in general. And also why they're not good business people.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I wanted to add, like, I do agree that about the sentiment of they're afraid, right? I can't send that invoice to the client. They're not going to pay that. And, they automatically start writing things off instead of sending the invoice. Maybe the client does pay. And if not, then you say, hey, I hear you. We want to be a good business partner to you. What if we knock that from 15,000 to 13,000, right? The client is going to feel you just did them a favor. They see the favor. That's the piece that I maybe wanted to flag. If you're doing all of that preliminary to sending the invoice, I guess if you want to do that, my recommendation would be you show the client, hey, we started at 15, and look, we gave you a discount. Because if the client doesn't know they're receiving the discount, it
doesn't exist.
Exactly. It doesn't. Yeah. It's not there. You hacked your bill rates and didn't really get the benefit of the goodwill of we gave you a discount.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you were saying earlier too with contracts that it makes more sense to go through all the not fun stuff at the beginning rather than later. And this part of the conversation with invoices, there's a parallel feeling with it. It's like if you're doing that behind the scenes, then there's something else going on that just needs to be talked about in the open in the open. And if you don't do it now, there's a good chance it's going to happen later anyway. If you're on that path and you keep going down that path.
Yeah, I mean, I think if this is a trend, so meaning every single month we're going through that exercise, that is where you need to pull back and say, are our bill rates not correct?
Right.
Are people not putting in the right activity so that the bill rate reflects correctly? Are we underbidding and we need to bid more? Is it always the same individual that we're having to do this for? If we're doing this month after month after month, that is where we do need to pull back and look at the macro level. If this is a one-off situation where you're near the end of the project and you have some extra time in there and you're like, I don't think we can bill that extra, $500. Yes, we put the time to the project, but is there perceived value there? No. Okay, let's write that off. Let's not bill that. But again, if that's happening every single month that you're invoicing the project, yeah, you probably do need to pull back and say what's going on.
The hour and a half went by super fast. So the final question I have is, we talked about some of the key common mistakes that offices make, starting with just not tracking time. But were there any other big key items that offices in general should look out for or be mindful of?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to think of how I could. You got me stumped here.
Or do you see any trends that offices are doing on their own? Any good trends?
Or bad trends?
Well, I think the good trends, and this does go into it connects to some of the things we've talked about before. I think as the ownership of firms is turning over and as the new generation is stepping in, I am seeing more and more firms open to evaluating, are our fees aligned? Are we bidding on the right projects? Like, are we looking at the right metrics? And being open to exploring that to make sure that the business is around another 20 years, right? Like the last generation kept the business open for 20 years. We want to do the same. We want to keep the business open for 20. And if we keep doing what they were doing for the last 20 years, it won't work. we have to pivot and change with the way the industry is changing. And so I think being open-minded and understanding that, that's the trend I'm seeing, is more as the leadership changes and moves to that next generation, the approach and the way they're handling the running of the business is changing for the better. So
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, you're good. So.
I was just gonna say, I love those remarks. I'm glad to hear that. It's also, I think, a really good place to conclude it on a positive note. Bryan, thank you so much for making the time on a Tuesday afternoon with us to talk about these things. Again, this interview went by incredibly fast, which is always a good sign, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the time as well.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support the show, then you can do so by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcast app. You can also find us on Spotify and YouTube and all other podcast places and things. We are on Instagram. That's the main social media platform we are at, where you can follow us, comment, DM us, whatever else. And the podcast has a hotline, which you can call to leave a voicemail or send a text message to. And then it's 213-222-6950. And so if you have any guest suggestions, topic ideas, questions you want answered, comments, that's a good way to do it. And you can find the podcast also at the website, which is secondstudiopod.com. All 50 something episodes now, something like that.
Yeah.
Are there.
456.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.